Shelters for 2 weeks after a confirmed case of coronavirus at its Riverton Place location in Burien. So here's what's impacted now. The men's shelter in Pioneer Square, Hope Place Women's Recovery Program in South Seattle, Riverton Place Men's Recovery Program in Burien, Kent Hope, which is a women's emergency shelter, and Sunshine Inn on Capitol Hill. The mission says it has great need right now for masks, disinfectant wipes, gloves, and hand sanitizer if you are able to donate. So Brandy Cruz joining us now live. And Brandy, if there was a confirmed case at just one of the locations, why lock them all down?
Well, really out of an abundance of caution and the knowledge that you have a lot of members of the homeless community who might be suffering a health issue or have some sort of underlying condition that could make them more susceptible to serious cases of COVID-19. But it was, interesting, Bill, that the switch on this came very, very quickly after there was the confirmation, or the day that there was the confirmation that there was a positive case at that Burien location. The shelter had come out and said, Union Gospel Mission had come out and said, hey, we're still going to remain open. There's a lot of need out there. And then the very next day, they announced they were putting these 5 locations into lockdown. I want to read for you a part of a statement that the president of the Union Gospel Mission sent out, Scott Chin. He said, in part, we love our homeless brothers and sisters. We feel a great sense of responsibility to protect each one who lives with us and calls the mission home. So by implementing this 14-day lockdown, they're hoping to protect the people who were already staying at those facilities. So a little bit of information on what these lockdowns at these 5 locations look like. So as I had said, 14 days, this lockdown is going to be in place. It means no one in or out. So there are some exceptions here. Clearly, if there's an emergency responders are going to be allowed to come into one of those facilities. And by the way, staff is included in this. So there are some staff members who have, and bless them, who have agreed to say, I'm going to be part of this 14-day lockdown, and they're going to be there taking care of folks. And they are not going to be accepting, I think this is important, they're not going to be accepting in-kind donations at these facilities. I know a lot of area businesses and other people like to drop off donations. You're not going to be able to do that during this period, except Bill, you had mentioned some much needed medical supplies that they're looking for, and you can find some information on the UGM's website about how to donate those. And then finally, and I think this is an interesting point, they are not going to force someone to stay inside one of these lockdown shelters. I had mentioned no in or out. So the exception to that sounds like if you have a homeless individual, for instance, who's utilizing the men's shelter in Pioneer Square and they choose to leave, they're going to be allowed to do that, Bill, but the crux of it is they can't return. So if they want to leave, they can leave, but they're not going to be allowed back in during the 14-day lockdown.
Okay, so with COVID spreading and the homeless crisis that was already existing in Seattle and other communities, this is something we have been talking about for weeks now on this show with you. What are the options for folks on the streets right now? If these shelters are in lockdown right now, and what does it mean, from a larger scale perspective from the county or the city?
Sure. Yeah, so a lot of people utilize UGM. I think it's important to note that a couple of these shelters that are closed serve a very specific purpose. We mentioned that there is a women's emergency shelter, and 2 of them are also recovery programs. So these aren't places that people were just walking into off the street anyway. They were people who were there for a specific recovery program. But for instance, the men's shelter in Pioneer Square is a very busy shelter where a lot of people go to sleep at night. And so certainly there's a concern about, okay, if I'm a homeless individual left on the streets and I can't get into this shelter and it's the shelter I usually utilize, what can I do? One thing I want to note, the city and county have been working hard to free up hundreds of spaces specifically for the purpose of housing individuals who are living on the streets who either might have been exposed to COVID-19 or are showing symptoms of COVID-19. So there are some new options. But I spoke to King County Executive Dow Constantine, and he actually said, as far as people who are currently living in tent cities, for instance, in unsanctioned homeless camps, their plan is to leave them there.
Because when they're dislocated, they go and they're not able to be managed, and they can circulate in the community if they happen to be infected. So the city of Seattle, for example, I think we said this in our press statement yesterday, was looking at putting out mobile bathrooms, hand sanitation facilities, so that people could do the same steps the rest of us are able to take for granted. But also, we are working to identify more and more and more places where people could get inside and separated from others on a temporary basis to avoid infection.
Yeah, so I think significant to note, Bill, obviously it's significant that Union Gospel Mission has put these 5 shelters on lockdown, but there are a lot of other spaces available, especially now in the last week or so, where the county and city have been working really hard to free up some space to deal with this during the crisis. But if you have people who are in homeless camps, the city and the county are not going in there actively trying to bring those people out. They're going to let them just stay in place for now.
All right, Brandy, thank you. Governor Jay Inslee has lifted the ban on